Welcome back to the B Block of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who is off this week. But I promise, again, she'll be back in the anchor seat next week. When we first started to produce a weekly news show here at Pro Cannabis Media during the pandemic, Michigan's Rick Thompson joined the Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt and Phil Adams out of Washington, D.C. as regular contributors to the program. In 2021, we had to figure out if a regular news show on a niche industry would be able to get a following and survive. 3 years later, we've had over 1.2 million views of our work on our YouTube channel alone, with more than half generated by our news content. A year ago, we lost Rick Thompson, but his influence in Michigan remains, and one of the founders of the Michigan Weedsters, our own Amie Carter, continues his legacy.
I'm Amie Carter from Michigan Weedsters with the Michigan Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. State officials are investigating allegations of improper record keeping, failure to maintain surveillance footage, and mishandling of cannabis products at the Exclusive Brands facility in Ann Arbor. According to a complaint, more than 10 pounds of marijuana products were unaccounted for at their business. In Ypsilanti, developers plan to open a 4,300 square foot cannabis lounge and outdoor amphitheater on a 6-acre lot. Visitors will be able to purchase marijuana at an adjacent dispensary, consume it indoors, and enjoy live performances. Michiganders living in two Oakland County neighborhoods, Royal Oak Township and Lathrop Village, will reportedly have a chance to vote on ballot measures this November to decide whether or not cannabis businesses will be allowed to operate in their communities. Make sure to cast your vote. This week marks the anniversary of the passing of former Michigan news correspondent Rick Thompson. Rick was a remarkable individual, a great friend, leader, and activist whose love, compassion, and dedication to the cannabis community were unparalleled. Let's honor Rick by remembering what he stood for.
Right, here's my medical marijuana card. Right on the bottom, it says authorized to possess plants. No. That means I'm a patient who's dependent upon a caregiver. This bill directly affects me. And I have to tell you, I've been doing this since 2010, coming to testify. This is a shocking level of lack of knowledge on the part of the lawmakers in regards to caregivers, patients, and the medical system itself. There's no way you are all in an educated state where you can be making decisions about what should and should not be made as changes here in the marijuana industry based on the questions that we've had today. There are 30,000 caregivers registered in the state of Michigan. Those 30,000 caregivers service 72,000 patients. Now, if we pass this bill and 30,000 caregivers are only allowed to service one patient, that means 42,000 Michigan voters are going to be booted from their caregiver supply of cannabis immediately.
Through his impactful activism, he played a pivotal role in advancing cannabis freedom in our state, even being recognized by the state of Michigan and the governor by receiving a proclamation. The Michigan cannabis community fondly remembered Thompson, commemorating the anniversary of his passing. He believed in community and throughout the years brought so many of us together. Rick Thompson will not be forgotten, and his words and beliefs will be honored. We will continue to protect the freedoms he helped pave the way for. That will do it for this week's news. I'm Amie, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast.
And congratulations go out to Amie Carter from Michigan for being named one of the Advocates of the Year in Michigan at this past weekend's NECANN trade show in Grand Rapids. Amie has been advocating for her son Jaden, who is challenged by autism, and she has to take him out of high school every day in order to give him his prescribed medicine. She is fighting to get Jaden's law passed that would allow school nurse practitioners to administer medicine during the school day to students who need it just to get through their day. There are 24 adult use legal states in the United States, but the green rush of 15 states legalizing cannabis sales to adults since 2019 has slowed. Ohio and Minnesota were the last two states to move forward, so now the race for number 25 continues. About a year ago, there was momentum in Pennsylvania to move their medical program forward by adding an adult use program. But despite leadership from their governor of that state, John Shapiro, the legislature continues to make a lot of noise about reform, but has not been able to move forward. Now, a bipartisan effort is being resurrected in that keystone state, but no one is very confident that this will be the right time. After all, in cannabis standard time, it's always one step forward, two steps backward. This bill, called House Bill 2500, would put the State Department of Agriculture overseeing the sale, regulation, and distribution of the market that would allow adults to buy and possess 30 grams or just over 1 ounce of weed, but home grow would be limited to those medicinal cardholders. Pennsylvania's medical program was started in 2016, and now there's also a clause to favor licensing to those most impacted by the failed war on drugs through expungement and pardons of past nonviolent cannabis crimes. There are currently 15 co-sponsors of this bill, led by Republican Aaron Kaufer and Democrat Emily Kincaid. So, from the race for the 25th legal state continues. In the meantime, let's check in with one of the first 2 states to legalize. Here's Xavier Jaillet in Colorado.
My name is Xavier Jaillet, and I am the Colorado correspondent for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm also the director of the Colorado chapter, or I should say director for the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and chair of the Colorado chapter. And I'm also a non-attorney professional at the McDonald Hopkins law firm. And today I really want to discuss a story that perhaps isn't specific to Colorado, but certainly impacts business operators here, both in the marijuana industry and the hemp industry, and most definitely impacts operators across the nation that are participating in hemp cannabinoid product development, sales, and distribution. And that is that a federal judge has actually pushed back on the DEA determination that THCO acetate, which is, for those that don't know, a more potent, slightly stronger version of Delta-9 THC, the intoxicating compound in cannabis. The federal judge pushed back on the DEA's determination that THCO acetate, under the language of the 2018 Farm Bill, was illegal. The judge said that the 2018 Farm Bill actually does say that downstream products, which would include, in this case, THCO acetate, are authorized and are legal under the language of the 2018 Farm Bill. Now, this is interesting because the DEA has been trying to restrict or narrow, we can say, the language found in the 2018 Farm Bill to not apply to each and every hemp-derived cannabinoid product out there in the market. Now, federal judges have already issued rulings. I think one that comes to mind is the AK Futures case out of the Ninth Circuit, that say that actually the 2018 Farm Bill language is not ambiguous, and it says very clearly that all downstream products that are derived from a hemp plant are lawful under that language. And so basically the judge has said that the DEA was overstepping its power and authority by determining that THCO was in fact illegal. Now, this is relevant for certainly operators across the nation, but again, operators in Colorado, because this means that many of the hemp-derived products that were under fire from state legislatures, Colorado being one of them, are now potentially, authorized at the federal level. And so it creates a conflict of law between the state prohibition and the federal authorization. Colorado is one of those states. We do have a rule in the books here that says that THCO acetate is a banned cannabinoid that cannot be used in the production of consumable cannabinoid products. And so while Colorado retains the authority under the Farm Bill to actually have that law in the books, states are allowed to preempt or pass more aggressive laws than the federal law for the 2018 Farm Bill concerning hemp. It is interesting to see that now the federal judiciary is stepping in and telling the DEA, wait a second, the determinations you've been making about these cannabinoids, we don't agree with, and we have the final say. And so it might be interesting to see how states respond to this, but also how individual operators take this information and potentially address and create new opportunities for themselves. And so while Colorado might be a state where currently THCO acetate is a compound that's not able to be used in products, it could be interesting to see the introduction or perhaps a lightening of the rules down the road. And the other thing that's going to be interesting to see how Colorado handles the fact that these products are allowed to be made at the federal level, and that surely some states now are going to authorize the production of THCO products in those states as well. And so how Colorado decides to protect its borders and prevent the introduction of these products into the Colorado cannabis market shall be interesting to see. Now, the final thing I want to do here, beyond just a news update, is to really shout out the Colorado cannabis community. Like I said at the top, I am the chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. I frequent networking events around Denver and the greater Denver area, and sometimes I commute to farther distances around Colorado. And for a long time leading into COVID, the Colorado industry was a bit depressed. I think prices had contracted to the bottom. Operators were not finding the success, the green rush that they had initially been promised, and there have been challenging times. But I do sense lately that there's been an uptick in positivity, in community, and in engagement and enthusiasm for the industry. So just wanted to shout out the local community here in Colorado for banding together, staying in the industry, and pushing through some hard times. And I'm excited to see everybody, hopefully, at our next networking event. Thanks. That's it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news update from Colorado, and looking forward to seeing you next week.
Now we want to introduce you to a new correspondent on our Coast to Coast news team. His name is Michael Zikaras, and he comes from down under, the country continent of Australia. He works in the industry, and we're looking forward to his regular reports on the legalization movement in that country that has shown actually some similarities with the United States, including some states that welcome and have legalized the plant medicine and some that do not. You've got a federal government, but you also have individual state laws. And sure enough, just like we have here in the States, there's a difference between the federal laws and the state laws, and it's really up to the states to dictate whether or not it's going to be accepted and legal, correct?
Yeah, correct. So we've got our federal government and our state governments. Federally, the cannabis was decriminalized, and we're able to use it for medical purposes. But there are still some state laws that are a little bit inconsistent in terms of prescribing, dispensing, and things like that. We're going through a number of changes at the moment, particularly when it comes to compounding flower, where a pharmacist actually puts it in the jar. But a good example of where the discrepancies are is Tasmania, a little state in Australia, separate from the mainland, is the only state at the moment where you're allowed to drive a vehicle with THC in your system. Everywhere in Australia, it's illegal, which is quite a contentious issue at the moment, considering a lot of the traditional medicines.
And how do they tell that you're driving under the influence of THC? Is there a test?
There's correct. There's roadside testing, and then if that tests positive, they do a secondary test. So,
but hang on. So this is one of the biggest challenges in the States, as you know, especially in legal states. Everybody's concerned about driving under the influence. However, it's driving while impaired. And that's really the biggest X factor here. Can you operate a vehicle not being impaired and still have THC in your system, which stays 30 days. So is the test a blood test, or is it a swab, or is it, do the alphabet backwards or something ridiculous like that?
It's a swab. It's a mouth oral test. So, and you're correct. It does stay in your system for a number of days, and people that had been impaired a day or two ago, but were no longer impaired, are being charged. So it's quite contentious here, considering you look at the sort of the wide gamut of other medications that people are driving under the influence on. So very topical in Australia at the moment.
Now let's go out onto the left coast, where Oregon's Marianne Cursetjee reports from Alibi, where legalization just can't happen soon enough to that state.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This upcoming legislative session is a long session, so stakeholders are taking the opportunity to craft new legislation. The cannabis industry is finally seeing the light after the scandals last year, and the industry is hoping to be able to work collaboratively with the OLCC and legislators to modernize Oregon's cannabis statutes. The OLCC has restructured and implemented a new management system called CAMP, which should help improve the efficiency of processing license changes and renewals. CAMP was frustrating for many when it was initially implemented, but seems to be working smoothly now. Hopefully, this system with the license moratorium will allow staff to speed up normal license changes, and thus creating the opportunity for improvements in this legislative session. Next, Seizures and arrests continue for illicit operators. This week, an illegal site in Washington County was shut down and about 6,600 pounds of cannabis were seized. Authorities were tipped off by odors coming from the property. Also, a traffic stop in Southern Oregon led to the discovery of more than 2,200 pounds of cannabis, presumably headed out of state. And also, an arrest was made at Portland Airport with a man flying from Portland to Colorado carrying 7 pounds of cannabis. Federal legalization can't happen soon enough. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That will do it for the B Block, our second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. When we come back, we will check in on the sights and the people from 2 cannabis festivals from coast to coast, the 12th Hall of Flowers in Santa Cruz, California, and the 35th Freedom Rally in Boston, as Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this. It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Now let me tell you my cannabis story. You know, I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weedgets filtration system. What? The Weedgets.com, Weedgets, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. The guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1,300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weedgets.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind.